Okay, here's the washes that we did in our last video. Something that I wanted to address is this fingerprint right here, right? We know that that came from someone putting their hands on their watercolor paper and getting oil on it. So that oil could just be from your skin, it could be from your face, it could also be from lotion that you might have put on before class on your hands, or from something that you ate. And so anytime you're doing watercolor, the first thing you want to do is make sure you wash your hands really well with a lot of soap and clean, fresh water to make sure that your hands have no oil on them. And so just make sure that you're always paying attention to that and thinking about that. The other thing is make sure you put your whole first and last name on your paper. You will think that you can recognize yours, but then you put it on the drying rack and you go to pick it up and you can't remember which one is yours because they all look the same from yesterday. And so make sure you have your whole first and last name on there. Now, the thing that we're gonna do now is we're gonna work on the back side of this. Now, anytime you start doing watercolor on one side of the paper, it will tend to curl a little bit. And this is because this is a sponge, so it absorbs the water on one side of the paper, the side you're using, and it expands. And then it dries and it shrinks back again. And so having watercolor paper get a little bit of a curve to it is normal, and it's really easy to fix. Once it's all the way dry, you can just smash it in a book or pat a little water on the back side of the paper, and that tends to flatten it out. Okay, so now we're gonna be working on the back side of the paper, okay? And so the first thing that we're gonna do is mix up our paint, and we have our clean water, we have our paper towels, we have our paper to test our paint on so that we can see what color it is. So we're all prepared with all of our materials and ready to start. So I'm going to take my paint, and the first thing I'm gonna do is mix up a puddle of the color that I want. So if you do that, if you flick paint on your paper, it can come off if you dry it immediately. So that was accidental. I was scooching stuff around, flick some paint on there. I just have to dry it right away. And even blue is a fairly dark color, and you can see how easily that came off. Okay, so I'm going to mix my paint so I have what I need. Okay, and then I'm gonna test it on my scratch paper. I'm gonna come over here and be like, how bright are you? Okay, that's pretty good. That's what I have in mind. So I have my paint mixed up, and I'm going to make sure I didn't have little flick bits on my work area. So the first thing I'm gonna do is this right here says wet and to dry. So I need to have that area dry for something that I'm gonna do later. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my brush and I'm gonna paint in that square with blue, because that's the color I feel like using. You can use any color you want. And I'm gonna try and be neat, but this doesn't need to be perfect because this is just a paper for practicing technique. And so it doesn't have to be perfect. So I have my paint on there, and I'm gonna vacuum the bottom off a little because I want that to kind of dry fast. Now, I'm going to be working on these areas on the other side. So we are doing resists. And what a resist does is it pushes the water away from the resist material, and with it, the watercolor paint. And so I'm gonna be showing you different resists that do different, like, interesting things with the paint and the watercolor. So the first one that I'm gonna start with is salt. So salt's gonna go right here in this box. So I'm turning my paper around so that that side of it is facing my brush and the hand that I use. If I was left-handed, I'd turn it this way to hold my brush this way. And then, but I'm right-handed, so I'm gonna put it this way. So I'm gonna get some paint on my brush, and I'm gonna do a little more blue because I already have it mixed and I don't wanna waste things. So I'm gonna come over here, I'm gonna get some water on my brush, and then I'm gonna pat a little bit off because I don't want salt sopping for it to work. So all of these, salt, soap, and alcohol, you have to have your paper like damp but not super wet. So you can see this one where we did the wet and to wet is a little shiny in areas, and other areas it's not shiny. So if I was to do the salt in this area right here that's not shiny, the salt wouldn't stick to the water and it wouldn't dissolve. And so I need a little bit of a shine, but not a puddle. And so there's a balance in how much water you want to have. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to fill this area in. So I have my materials ready to go. And so I'm going to get this in here. And like I said, I want it damp but not a puddle. So I'm going to kind of use my brush to vacuum a little bit off the edge. And now I'm just going to watch my moisture level until it gets to the right point. Okay, so I can see a little damp but not a puddle. So the water doesn't move, the paint doesn't move with the water when I do that. So now I have my little container of salt. I'm going to get some salt and I'm going to sprinkle it on there. And you can see that the salt will stick best where the right amount of moisture is. And so it's really easy to tell, like, is that effect going to work in this area? It's not, because the salt's not sticking there, right? So you don't want a ton of salt. You just want enough that you can see the effect that it does. So what happens with the salt is the salt draws the water to it, and then the water melts the salt, and as the salt dissolves, it pushes the paint away from itself. And so here is one that I did earlier so that you could see the little cool effect the salt does. It's like almost little sparkly, little lacy edge on it. And so this is dry, so what I can do is any salt that's left, I can just brush it off with my finger, and you can see that. Now, different colors will do different things. Like if I did this with red, the red paint would almost separate, and you'd be able to see where the other tones of paint that are in that red that are used to make that color. And it does a really cool effect. So in this blue, if I did it darker, I'd probably get a little hint of this purple that you see down here around the edges. So we'll see if that works on this one. So this one is kind of doing its thing. And so I'm going to not work in this box right next to it because this is still damp. I just painted that. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna switch colors because I feel like having it be a different color. Okay. So I'm gonna rinse my brush out, and then I'm going to get clean water, okay? Changing your water is one of the most important things you can do because you have to keep your paint from cross-contaminating everything. So I'm switching my water out so I have fresh, clean water, and I'm going to mix up my next color. Okay, so I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna be like, ooh, what do I feel like? I think I feel like purple. So I'm gonna get some purple going. And for alcohol in particular, I like to use a pretty vibrant color, a pretty strong color. And so purple is pretty strong. It's gonna show the effect a lot. Okay, and I may like jump into some red a little too so that there's a tiny bit of variation, just for fun. Okay, so I'm gonna test my purple. I'm always testing my color before I use it. That's pretty good. I'm happy with that. Okay, I could make it a teeny bit stronger if I want. So the next one I'm gonna do is alcohol. So same thing, I'm gonna turn my paper so that I have access to that. Now, I have my little container of rubbing alcohol and I have a dropper that I'm gonna use to drop single drops of alcohol onto the paper. And alcohol gives a really cool circular impact point effect that looks really neat. Okay, so I'm gonna come over here, I'm gonna get my purple paint, or violet if we're doing color theory, right? I'm going to paint in that box. Oh look, there's another dirty fingerprint right there. Okay, so I want some more effects to show on this one, so I'm going to dip into a little red real quick, just for fun, because I like what it does when the paint mixes around a little more. Okay, now alcohol is like salt in that we want to have a sheen but not puddles. So I'm going to use my brush for a little vacuuming on this edge. So I'm just going to suck some of that paint off. Okay, now you can see it's it's wet, but there's no movement of water around except on this edge. I'm gonna vacuum that off again. Let's just see if we can't pull more of that paint off the edge. Okay, that's good. All right, so it's wet. So areas where it's wet, it's gonna work. Areas where it's already dry right here, the alcohol won't do anything. Okay, so I'm gonna take my little dropper and I'm going to keep my paper flat while I'm doing this, and look at what it does. It's super cool. Okay, and this will frequently pull through to the other side of the paper even. Okay, so if you do big drops, it does a big circle. If you do small drops, it does small circles. Okay, and this is a big dropper, so I could even just touch the edge of it with my finger with a little alcohol on it and it'll do different things. I can also take my finger and flick for just little effects where I just have my finger just touching the alcohol. And you can see instantaneous cool effects where you can see what the impact's gonna be. Okay, so we're gonna let that dry. So this is drying, this one's drying with the salt dissolving. So I'm gonna come over here next and I'm gonna do this area with the wax. Okay, now at school we have white crayons. I'm at my house right now and so I don't, but what I have is this little tea light that's never been used. Okay, so I can come over here with this and use the edge of it to get some wax on here. Now, obviously white wax, white paper, I can't really see super clearly where it's going, but I'm just gonna get some wax on there. And it leaves little bits, right? So you can see there's little bits on there. So I'm just gonna super gently, just barely brush it off, because I don't want that mixing in with my paint and doing something weird. Okay. All right, there's my alcohol drying. It's so cool looking. All right, now I already have some red in my brush, so I'm going to make sure that my brush is nice and clean. And I think I'm gonna go over here and I'm just gonna do some red over the top of all of this. Okay, so I'm gonna check my color first, always checking it, right? And I don't want it too solid because I want to be able to mess around in the separations that I made in my wax. So that's my color that I have going and that's fine. So with my red, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to paint in the square that I drew a bunch of lines across. And you can see anywhere the wax is, it's going to resist the paint. Now, what I like to do with wax is once I have my first layer on there, I'm going to blot my brush to dry it out a little, and I'm going to use my kind of clean brush to vacuum off some of the areas where the wax is. Now, you can see it's not a perfect system. It doesn't pull it all the way off. So if I wanted really white clouds, like for a landscape, I wouldn't use wax because it doesn't do it cleanly. But what is cool about wax is I can come in the spaces in between and get more vibrant color and paint it in there and have it kind of be contained between the lines of wax, right? So I can get in here with this and it's not going to bleed into another area because I have borders of wax around that whole area. It's going to contain that paint in that one section. I can also get in here and get into other colors. Like I can go back to some more of that violet. And this is a really fluffy Sumi brush, and so it doesn't hold its tip as well as other ones. But I can get in here with the violet and paint violet in those sections, and it'll stay there because the wax traps it. So it's pretty cool. But areas where there's wax, it's always going to have the wax. And so you have to be careful planning how you're going to use it because it won't accept paint over the top well at all. And so I can come in here and paint any ones of these that I want, and see the wax keeps that paint in that area. But anywhere I'm getting colors, especially dark colors over the top of the wax, it does that little choppy, chunky effect, which doesn't, I think, look super pretty. But it might be an effect you want if you're trying to do something that looks rough or coarse or whatever. Okay, and so you can go back and try and soften that with a clean brush and lift that off the top of the wax, just using a brush that has water on it only. Now, you can see there's little bits of stuff that's trapped right there. It's really tempting to go in there and try and muck around with it, but if I do, I'm probably gonna mess up my area. So what I'm gonna do is let it dry all the way. And that's one of the big mistakes that people make with watercolor a lot, is that they get in a rush and they don't let things dry. You have to let things dry. If you don't, the watercolor is always gonna bleed together, and it's not going to look the way you want it to look. Okay, so now I'm ready to come over here and do soap. And so once again, I'm turning my paper so I can access it with my brush. I'm going to get clean water because I'm switching colors again, just because I feel like it. You could do these all with the same color if you wanted to. That's totally up to you. I like to mix it up. So I'm getting more fresh water. So here we go, clean water, clean brush. Keeps your colors true. Okay, so I think I'm gonna go into some green. Okay, so I'm mixing my green and then I'm gonna test it. And for the soap effect, you want pretty vibrant color so that it shows up nicely. And this is a really pretty yellow green. And so that's nice and vibrant. I'm gonna paint in my area. Okay, and so I have waited until the alcohol is dry, the salt area is pretty dry. I could have waited even a little bit longer. Now, see this right there? There's still alcohol in the paper right there, and you can see how it's pushing it away. Okay, so this is another one where we want to control the water level. Now, for soap to work, you want to have it, the paper a little more wet than with salt or with alcohol, but I still don't want puddles. Now, I have regular soap right here. This is just white bar soap. It's important that the soap doesn't have any color. At school, we use the hand soap. Foaming soap works good. It gives a softer effect. This is just like a Dove soap. So I have a brush that I'm not using for anything else for the soap. So you can see, here's my damp area. So check out the soap. Okay, soap just pushes the water away from itself. Now, I can't go back in here and mess with this area with anything else. I also have to be super careful with this contaminated brush that has soap on it. If I went and put this in my paint, it would wreck my paint. And so anytime I use soap, I do the soap and then I take that brush and I go straight over to the sink and I wash it so that I don't accidentally use it and mess everything up. Okay, the last one we're gonna do on this real quick is gonna be tape. Oh, we didn't do glazing yet. Okay, so glazing is a technique that we use to get really, really, really vibrant colors. So I'm gonna come over here with my yellow green and I'm gonna paint some shapes so that you can see what will happen with glazing. Because for glazing to work, it has to be all the way dry. Okay, so I'm gonna get that color down and then I think I'm gonna go with a little bit of purple. And I'm leaving spaces in between so you can see what happens with glazing for single layers versus multiple layers. Okay, so we're gonna let that dry just like that. Okay. All right, the next resist that we are using is gonna be tape. Now, I have blue tape at my house, and so tape works just the way you think it would. Okay, so I have cut out some little like cheesy generic clouds. Now, if you're doing this with masking tape, which is what we have at school, you're going to want to de-tack the tape a little bit, make it less sticky. And one of the best ways to do that is take the tape, whatever shape you've made out of it with scissors or just using it straight, stick it on your forearm where there's no hair, peel it off. That makes it less sticky so that when you take it off your paper, it doesn't rip it. Now, these are cheesy fake clouds. Like, we know fake or real clouds don't look like this, but you know, I want it to be recognizable. So I have my little fake cloud shapes that I've cut out, you know, that I'm gonna stick down here. And tape, you wanna get the edges down smoothly. That's the part that matters the most for tape. I also made a little fake cheesy hill for my little generic landscape, right? Okay. So I could even have done a little wash right here where I have, you know, a blue background, or done a gradient from, like, you know, sunset colors or whatever for this. But for the sake of efficiency, we're just gonna do that. So I'm going for landscape, so I think I'm just gonna make this have a blue sky. So with my clean brush, my clean water, everything's clean, I'm going back into my blue paint that I have already, and I'm gonna test it, always test it. Okay, now I can go around and just paint around this to make my little generic sky, and then let it dry, right? Tape's super obvious and straightforward. Okay, and so that's gonna be my little sky, and I'm gonna leave that to dry, and then we'll peel the tape off in a minute. Okay, now I could even go into this if I wanted to, tap a few other colors into this, like maybe I want a little hint of some turquoise here just for variety. And so I can put that in while it's wet and let it just kind of do its thing. Okay. All right. So that's a nice little puddle, and we're gonna leave that to dry, and we'll peel it off in the next video after it's dried to see how it looks. Okay, now before we do that, real quick though, check out what's happening with the section with the alcohol. You can see that it is starting to wick those colors into itself. So that's something to keep in mind with watercolor. It will rehydrate paint from nearby areas and mix it in together if it's not all the way dry, like completely 100% dry, like from yesterday. And so keep in mind that letting it dry is the way to keep your colors separate. Okay, we're just gonna let that chill and dry.